Hello, my fellow readers. Dark Symphony 777 with the Fanfiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts to the story, and finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So, the story I am doing a review of today is the second part Project Genesis fanfiction. It is part 2 of 3 of this Command and Conquer novelization slash rewrite that is going on. And I have to say, I am really getting into this story. I know I'm not going to talk about the the actual plot yet, because there is some stuff that I need to talk about beforehand. So, what is this story? Well, this is like I said, part 2 of a 3-part series. This video is going to cover the Tiberium Sun novelization, as well as the Firestorm expansion, which kind of takes place immediately after the events of Tiberium Sun. And I want to say, I do like this story. I don't think it's better than Tiberium Dawn, but I don't think it's worse. It's kind of like on the same level of Tiberium Dawn. And I liked Darkfire's Tiberium Dawn novelization. I think that was good. The only thing I didn't like was the combat. And even like the characters, none of the characters having descriptions. Like I said, I can get why the author didn't do that with like some of the characters. Just some of the other characters need that. Kind of the same thing with this. It's just weird. I don't want to touch on it too much, because I think the third story might have the same issue. But I do also want to bring up a small detail with the story before getting to the review, and that is this story's status as a novelization. So in Tiberium Dawn, that one was like a gray area, with the events of Tiberium Dawn being mixed with Tiberium, with Command and Conquer Renegade. And that kind of made things very confusing, as well as the fact that certain parts of the Nod story in Tiberium Dawn are canon as told by Renegade. So that makes sense. But this story is such a weird gray area, in the fact that the first half of the story is just a straight up novelization. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't really have any issues with it. But the second half of the story just straight up goes into a rewrite territory. So that kind of muddies the water on, the fact that the author is calling this a novelization, as shown right there on the picture. It is kind of a gray area because, again, a large part of it is a novelization, but the other half isn't, especially the Firestorm expansion. The Firestorm expansion is just out and out rewrite of it. But we'll get to that when we get to that. But I just wanted to clear that up, because I didn't know where else I would be able to put talk about the novelization gray area in this review. So I wanted to just get it out of the way. It's not going to have any hampering on the story. I do think the story's slow. I did kind of predict. I don't think I mentioned it in the previous video. I mentioned it in private with like friends that I think it would be the best idea for it, like as it goes along, it stops being a novelization, just goes full on rewrite, because of how the author's just connecting everything together. So I think that's honestly the best route to take, and I'm lucky that the author seems to be taking that route. I don't know about Tiberium Wars yet, because I haven't started on that one. But who knows? Maybe the author would prove me wrong. Like, is the author going to stick with the novelization, or is Tiberium Wars going to be a full-on rewrite? I don't know. But now that we got that out of the way, what is Tiberium Sun about? Now, for those of you who don't know the timeline of the whole thing, oh, sorry, still recovering from sick for a minor part, thank throat. Tiberium Sun takes place 30 years after the events of Tiberium Dawn. Half the world has now been enshrouded in Tiberium. It is now infecting everything from the land to the soil to the plant life to the animal life, and all the nations left in the world have pretty much collapsed. Nod is but a shell of its former self, embroiled in a sort of peace hostility centered around a man named Hassan, who was from Operation Foul Justice. He wanted to basically recoup and rebuild Nod from the ground up due to the First War, kind of destroying so much of their force they kind of became a shell. So he decides to rule Nod for about 30 years to 20 years as revealed in Final Justice, and basically let them lick their wounds. However, on the other side, he is actually being manipulated by James Solomon and GDI with the task of trying to keep the situation between Nod and GDI kind of low down, so that way people don't find out that they're kind of working together, but more in the sense of just trying to stay away from each other, sort of deal. But there is a man by the name of Anton Slavic, the leader of the Nod Black Hand. Now, I didn't mention the Black Hand in Tiberium Dawn, mainly because they were kind of a blip in the Tiberium Dawn storyline, mainly because in the game they're never really mentioned. They're implied, and even then it's only implied through like hindsight, because Tiberium Sun is where the Black Hand gets their name. But if you play Tiberium Dawn, on the last mission of the GDI side, you find out that Nod is being kind of protected by his elite guard, which are the Black Hand. Anton Slavic is actually the leader of the Black Hand as of Tiberium Sun, as well as the heir apparent to Cain should Cain get indisposed. Like, I don't know, like taking an ion cannon to the face? Anton wants to reunite Nod and start a second Tiberian war, which he does do. And then, well, right as he has Hassan in his hands and he's about to unite Nod, well,
in the name of Cain, in the name of Cain, in the name of Cain, Cain lives.
Cain's death has been grossly exaggerated. And so, Cain decides, I want you to do a bunch of these errands for me. Yeah. This justifiably pisses off Anton, who decides to basically, in his best interest, to kind of take interest in an intrusive thought he has. What if Cain dies again, and I take over Cain? After all, it's like what Seth said.
You see, power shifts quickly in the Brotherhood.
And he decides, well, win or lose, I'm gonna make sure I end up ruling Nod. Now you're wondering, why am I talking so much about the Nod campaign? Shouldn't I be talking about the GDI campaign? Because that's the campaign that canonically happened? Well, this is sort of a weird situation where about the first third, or at least the first half of the story, is very, very heavily focused on the Nod side of things, while the second half of the story is heavily focused on the GDI. Like, once you get to, like, I think chapter 7 or 8, Nod kind of disappears, more or less. They still kind of show up, because, of course, they're, like, the two factions fighting. And it's just Nod doesn't really have too much of a big deal with the whole thing. Meanwhile, GDI kind of takes over the whole storyline like halfway through. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, that is eventually at the end in the final battle. Anton Slavik eventually does decide to, I'm going to fucking pull this shit off. Decides to help Kane, and once he realizes Kane's about to lose, skedaddles out of there. He leaves. He leaves. I can't remember if it's Cairo or Sarajevo. Sarah, I think it's Cairo. And skedaddles to let Kane die again. Don't worry, he comes back. He always does. He is the Messiah, after all. And eventually decides to take over Nod as permission. Ha! And then he does, and then he dies in at the end of the Firestorm expansion. We'll talk about, I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's just really funny how that happens. But now that we got through the Nod side of things, what about the GDI? Well, the GDI side of things really sticks out with a guy by the name of Mac McNeil, who is the main commander. McNeil and Slavik, all the two main commanders. McNeil's side of the story is basically just a standard hoorah, time to save the day sort of deal, where they eventually have to work, where there's a bunch of various missions they have to go on. It's not as deep or intricate or even interesting as the Nod, but it is what is canon. Even though, honestly, in the Tiberian side of things, Nod just simply had the better story. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. I can't deny that. As much as I like Tiberian Sun, out of 3 Tiberian games, Tiberian Sun's is actually my favorite. Even I can't deny the GDI story in Tiberian Sun was not great. Basically, they find out that Kane has some kind of type secret project going on. They find a ship which actually belonged to the Skirin. It's supposed to be another hint towards the Skirin's involvement in Tiberium eventually, and the Tacitus, and they have to work together with the Forgotten, which are these people who have been transformed into mutants by the Tiberium. They basically are able to they basically survive in Tiberium for the most part, and all that jazz. They have to help Umagon with and deal with Tratos, and excuse me. And then eventually they are able to stop. They find out about Kane trying to shoot down the GDI Philadelphia, which is this huge space station that kind of regulates everything. And and then McNeil kind of just kills Kane by stabbing him in the heart with a broken pillar or something like that. It's kind of weird, but like I said, the GDI campaign is not really that interesting. Oh, as much as oh, oh, I really do like Sun, but that plot is just nothing. But overall, I think the plot is done really well, but that's just the command side. What about the Conquer side? Well, the Conquer side takes place from the perspective of 2 characters. Wade Tabak, who is nothing more than a simple foot soldier in Nod's campaign. He slowly rises up the ranks and and his interactions with some of his friends. And on the GDI side, you have John Lancaster, the son of the commander from Tiberian Dawn, Mark Lancaster. That's actually a really well done story. It really hops into the mind of the interconnectivity of the storyline as a whole, where you have with the Nod campaign, you have a completely different different group of characters. Of course, we had Higgs. Higgs is technically involved. He's the guy that even who actually raises and trains Slavic to the point where Slavic kind of just becomes the killer and kills Higgs. Well, on the other side, it's you have a more familiar bond between father eventually leaving the bit and leaving the army and his son joining in order to follow his footsteps and all that. It's a neat story beat that connects the two stories together on both sides, like Higgs Higgs technically raising Slavic and Mark technically raising John, and there are various ways of growing into the whole thing as it goes along. I do think it does make sense. I do think the characters are. I'm getting ahead of myself because I haven't even talked about Firestorm yet. Okay, so Firestorm. What's the plot of Firestorm? Well, immediately after the events of the war, Slavic basically starts to rebuild Nod. Basically, since Nod lost, since Kane died, Nod Slavic is trying to just rebuild Nod, but he's kind of getting hamstrung by the other high-ranking members because they didn't like the fact that Kane died, and they're trying to recuperate in their own ways. And Nod realizes that in order to get full control over Nod over, he needs to reactivate Cabal. Cabal is the the Nod counterpart to Eva on the GDI. He's basically their main AI construct who basically is trying to operate everything and trying to run everything. He also apparently knows everything about the Tacitus. He's the reason why Kane's able to use the Tacitus in any sort of way. Meanwhile, McNeil is kind of got fired from his position as commander, and now he's kind of becoming a commander of a group called Project Firestorm, which is meant to be a sort of black ops sort of deal that's meant to deal with various biological warfare, specifically pertaining to Tiberium, as well as trying to aid as like bodyguard control for scientists trying to figure out a way to permanently deal with Tiberium. Eventually, they both meet Cabal. Cabal lets himself get caught by GDI. Then Cabal goes rogue. Now we know that at the end of Sun, if you actually read this story and get to the end, you find out that Cabal planned on going rogue in the story. This in the base expansion, it's kind of just he just kind of goes rogue out of nowhere. But in this, at the end of this rewrite, it is implied that he was planning on going rogue because under Kane's orders. Because he needed time to get like the marked and stuff like that. Eventually, Cabal going rogue forces Nod and GDI having to work together. They don't want to work together because they really do want to kill each other. It's like, I really fucking hate you. I want to kill you right now. It's like, same. But they kind of have to work together because otherwise, Cabal will just take them out individually. So it's like either we work together begrudgingly to take out this guy and then just go back to fighting afterwards, or we keep fighting and then Cabal just takes us out. Either just takes us out regardless. Rather take the cooperation because at least we'll have a chance of fighting and we can just kill each other afterwards. And that's basically what happens. They do eventually take out Cabal with the ion cannon. McNeil decides to step down because he's like, well, no, he doesn't. He doesn't really step down. He wants to step down, but they might kind of step him up by becoming like I think a higher ranked member of GDI to the point he's like on the Philadelphia. And Anton gets killed. Okay, now I get to talk about that. I want to point out how hilarious this is. It's so weirdly funny how Anton dies. Let's see, where is he? Let's see. Here it is. So Marcion, who is the confessor, because Nod is very religious in purpose. Didn't like the fact that Slavic decided to team up with GDI. Keep in mind, in the context of the story, they all admit that either we have to work together or Cabal just kills everyone. And we can, and they even open admit that after Cabal gets taken out, we're just gonna kill it. We're just gonna fight again anyway, which is what happens as soon as Cabal dies and McNeil and Slavic leave, they just start killing each other again. It's just, yeah. Marcion goes into the Montauk, which is basically Slavic's base. It's like a big drill train thing. He talks to Slavic. Slavic knows Marcion's there. He's like, "Oh, you are a heretic. You teamed up with GDI." It's like, I did what I had to do because otherwise Cabal would have killed all of us. And even Slavic points out, like, well, you worked with them too. And then Slavic gets garroted by a guy named by the name of Brother Park. Now I get why this had to happen because Slavic does actually die between the events of Tiberian Sun and Tiberian Wars. That's a canon event. He does canonically die. It's just never revealed when. He just kind of gets killed between the times. So it makes sense that he does die afterwards. I just find it funny that it's just done in such a very hilariously stupid way. It's like, I'm calling you out for working with GDI, but you worked with GDI too. Shut up. I just think I just think it's funny. Again, just like with the novelization thing, this doesn't really have any bearing on what I think of the story as a whole. I just wanted to mention that. I just think it's dumb. In a very funny way. I know, like I said, I know he's supposed to die. It's just, you could have done this. You could have killed him in any number of ways. No, you just kill him. You just kill him like that. And that is the overall plot of Tiberian Sun. I do think that the Nod side of the story is better. Again, that's more to the fact that the GDI plot of Tiberian Sun is not the greatest. It really isn't. So that's not really on the author's. That's not really Darkfire's fault because he's trying to polish a turd. You can polish a turd, but it's still a turd. And no amount of like dressing at the entire plot is not gonna stop the fact that the GDI side of the story is just very dull and uninteresting, just on a conceptual stance. I'm not gonna blame the author for that because he was honestly trying to make the best of what he had. Because again, it's still while getting away from novelization, still has a lot of the novelization aspects in place. So I'm not gonna criticize the author too much on that. He just tried he did the best he could with what he had, is what I'm saying. Characters. This is the big difference. So with Tiberium Dawn, I said the story was very much carried by the characters. The fight scenes were very dull and uninteresting, but they were carried by actually well written and well likable characters. Like, I really liked pretty much every major character in Tiberium Dawn. Tiberium Sun is the opposite. It has I really love the combat like the conquer sections, because the author expands on them in every single way in the best ways possible. But the characters are just they're very hit or miss. I don't like the characters here. Let's run them down. Mac McNeil. He's a glory hog. He's basically a typical action style hero. He's fine, but he's just again, he's uninteresting compared to Anton Slavic. Slavic was basically He's fucking Anton Slavik. There's a reason why people still like the guy from like a character standpoint, because he's much more interesting than Mac McNeil. Anton Slavik basically was raised from a kid to become Kane's successor when Kane eventually dies to carry on his fight. I really love that. He's a very brute force, blunt man. Of course, Mac McNeil is also blunt. He's just blunt in a different way. He's just, and there's not really much more substance to McNeil. But with Anton has a lot more substance. There's even like an added extra feature, like extra dimension Darkfire does to his character by one having the ghost of Higgs, the one of the main characters from Dawn, just show up periodically, just kind of toss the guy. Say, ha ha ha, bitch! And basically just kind of poke fun. Even like when Slavic dies, okay, so you can actually, if you go right here, let's see. Like you can see right here, and Slavic struggled, but it was no use. As the life slowly seeped out of Slavic's body, he stared off at something just beyond Marcion, almost as if he were seeing a ghost. That's because, if you read right here, it is his ghost! Just basically just poking fun at him. I will say, I really wish the author kind of had Higgs say something here. I think that would have just, like, we knew it was Higgs, like, you know, it's supposed to be Higgs' ghost, but it's like, the fact that Higgs doesn't say nothing, he's like, oh yeah, good on you. Even something like stupid, like saying you're dead, it's just, that's a missed opportunity. But also the big thing, as I mentioned in the plot, in the nod plot, being that Slavic eventually starts to get like the idea of usurping Kane. Like even if like the moment Kane reveals himself, he slowly kind of gets very very frustrated of the fact that he's doing these errands, and like he's staring out at the Montauk, and he's like he's been taught to get rid of these like intrusive thoughts, like ignore them. But he's like he gets an intrusive thought and like let's humor him. What if I take over Kane, like take over Nod, and usurp Kane, uh, by hook or by crook? It is an interesting character dynamic, a character dimension that is not if that is not mentioned in the canon, but it is a neat wrinkle to Slavic as a whole, because it's like it parlays into everything that goes on and also plays into his death. It's really well done. I honestly think Slavic's the best written character in the story, despite him not showing up all the time. And another a neat detail about the big fights that I want to mention here before getting to the other two main characters is the big fights they are very more dynamic. They're very more fleshed out. A lot of stuff happens. A lot of impact happens. But also there are parts periodically throughout the fights. They actually get the author actually writes back to McNeil and Slavic's position and shows them directing the troops and showing the fights through their perspective. I think that was something that needed to happen in Dawn. Like I said, this story does the fights so much better in every single feasible way. If Dawn was carried by the characters, these are carried by the fights. The fights are just that good in this story. But then you have but going back to the other two characters, you have John Lancaster and Mark Tabak. Mark Lancaster is, I don't really know too much. I don't really care too much about him. Now it does make sense because he does apparently. I don't know for sure, but I think if I have to guess, since the end of the story kind of implies that he's gonna go into like the command position that his father was, he's probably gonna be involved in the third story in some way. Since Tiberium Wars only takes place 10 years after the events of Tiberium's son, so there's a chance he may come back. Don't know for sure, but he's functional. I mean, he does fulfill the purpose of being like the Lancaster of the story. and having a clear connection to the previous story through his father. And I think he's better written than McNeil. Like, I think that's fine. Like, those whole, like, every single character kind of suffers from the fact that they're not Anton Slavic. Like, that's kind of what this story suffers from. Is this character Slavic? No, they don't care about him. But Lancaster, he gets the job done from a like character fundamentally level. Like, he's fine. He's basically a soldier who's kind of, he's not really a new guy, but he's not really like up the top. He's like a sergeant, so he's kind of like the second in command. But as the story goes along, he's kind of forced into situations where he has to take command. Like, either his higher up kind of gets injured near the end of the story, so he's like, "You're in charge," so he kind of have so that or like he's kind of indisposed, and Lancaster has to take charge, and you can see that the author is trying to do like a sort of like front line to back line sort of deal where he's kind of like he's slowly realizing that he has a knack for being like a commander in chief sort of deal. I think it's fine. It's not particularly interesting because Lancaster he kind of is there as a character, but if you're looking at does this character work in the context of the story? Yes, he does work in the context of the story. He's just not particularly interesting. And then you have Wei Tabak, who is so monumentally uninteresting as a character. I preferred Lancaster as a character to Tabak. Tabak is just such a nothing character, and it's kind of a shame that there was something going on with him. Like, okay, he's working for Hassan, but he's not really putting his all into it. And he's basically like the stereotypical nod soldier, like very fanatical, very zealous, and just in the fight. But then as the first couple chapters goes on, and his friends, like the people who he's befriended for like years and years, they start dying. He has a change of heart, and he's like, I don't think I should be in this anymore. Like a zealot becoming less of a zealot because the people he cares about are dying. That's actually an intriguing character arc. Except the author doesn't do nothing with the character. He does nothing with Tarbach. Instead, he turns him into a lovesick boy obsessed with his CO, Joyce. And then that character point of him like just not caring about the war anymore because of like the friends he lost, that's just gone. And so the very last chapter of Firestorm, where he nearly loses another friend. Thankfully, that guy survives. And then the end of the story just reveals that like he just left the army, and now they're just gonna become like just like blue collar work as you can get in like a super hyper religious uh warmongering group like the Brotherhood of Nod can be. But he just becomes like, nah, I'm just gonna become a factory worker now. And so does a Joyce apparently. And then they just like the very end of the story of their little arc is they're just eating at an Italian restaurant, and then Slavic ship the Montauk blows up, and they're just staring at it. It's like, that is a perfect summarization of his entire character. Irrelevant. That's I could have liked Tabak. That is what hurts the most about Tabak is I could have liked him if the story kind of kept like the vibe of him slowly becoming disenfranchised with the war, and him becoming disenfranchised with like combat in general. Instead, he just kind of takes a backseat to like lusting after a chick. Okay, that I mean, you could something could have been done with that, like having Joyce like being the one to keep him in the war until eventually she gets disenfranchised because she starts suffering from the same issues as him. That would have been interesting. It would have. It actually would have made a lot more sense, considering the fact it's implied that both of them are just becoming factory workers now. But it just Tabak is just such a nothing of a character. I just don't I just don't care about him. I don't care about the so that's it. I'll have to say about the characters. Those are the four main characters. There are characters that are with the group like Chandra and Tom West, who is the son of the West from Tiberian Dawn. Tom West dies. He kind of gets hit by a mortar. And like Fong or Damien and stuff like that. They're okay, but they're just it still doesn't help the fact that everyone except Slavic is just more or less just a nothing character, at least in my opinion. And none worse than Tabak. Okay, back to the story. I don't want to rant too much about this. Grammar wise, there are some grammar errors, mostly due to the author inadvertently not spacing words throughout the story. They're very few and far between, but I just want to mention them. Pacing wise, I think the story's paced perfectly. There's a lot of small, just like with Dawn, there's a lot of small details that if you know Tiberium's son, you're able to pinpoint, but are not too are not really that hard to find out if you're not into it. There's the details with like the Tiberian fiends. There's even a cameo by the Tiberian hopper, I believe it's called. It was like a floating jellyfish sort of deal. Uh, like the eye candy, the plot points. The author did cut out a lot of this stuff because the Tiberian Sun missions are very short because there's a lot of optional missions in Tiberian Sun. So it makes sense why the author had to cut out a lot of stuff on both sides because there's just he can only pick so many missions that will at least be interesting to kind of tie together a coherent story. But all the chapters have something that tie into possibly either Tiberium Wars when I get to that story, or it ties into something from Tiberium Dawn. It it is this sort of eternal consistency. I'm trying to keep everything tied together and connected across all three of these stories is really the bedrock of why I think Tiberium Sun is really well done outside of the fight scenes, and it really helps keep the story together as the author is trying to keep everything coherent and tied together. And I think ultimately the author does really well with it. And I don't really have anything more to say about the story. Would I recommend Tiberium Sun? I recommend Tiberium Dawn, and I would recommend Tiberium Sun. It's on the same level as Tiberium Dawn in terms of quality. And outside of the characters, I don't really have an issue with anything. Favorite part? Don't really have a favorite part. Probably, probably. No, I don't really have a favorite part. There's just a lot of neat moment. There's a lot of neat moments that happen throughout the story. That everything happens, like the whole like the mutant, like wait no, like the mutants, like they like there's a part in the story where like they cat like the mutants and GDI work together. They get into a nod place and they're like surrendering. It's like we surrender, and like GDI is about to say, "All right, let's go, Cap," and then the mutants just fire them. And it's like what are you doing? It's like killing them. That's war crimes. Says who? Says the Geneva Convention and human decency. The Forgotten don't follow either. Shit. What do I do? That might be the closest I had to a favorite part because I think it's just kind of funny. Uh, but I don't really have anything else. Do I have? What would I change about this story? So a couple of minor things. First off, I would probably rewrite Slavic's death scene to kind of have Higgs go say something. Doesn't matter what it is. It's just a really missed opportunity for him not to say something. Instead of like the whole circumstances, it really would have made more sense for him to say something. That's just me. Let's see. Earlier in the story, there is a yeah, here, right here. There's a part where they're fighting the core defender, which is this gigantic mech that's being controlled by Cabal, and it's like his last line of defense. And they have to plant one of the legs are weakened, but the legs are like fucking massive. So I don't know why the author wrote placing the C4 charges on the legs. Instead of that, you could have just had it. I would suggest like instead of saying place it, like have Lancaster like rewrite it to say he throws the C4 onto the legs, because like how is he supposed to place C4 on a gigantic tree trunk leg that's moving? It would make more sense to have him just to type and say throw it, man, do a flip, and all that. But outside of those, the only other thing I would really change would be Tabak's character. I can't really do much about Mac McNeil's character because it's like the author is kind of stuck with him as is, so I can't really say anything about that. Lancaster, I wouldn't be surprised if Lancaster kind of shows up in the next story because of the time discrepancy. So I'm gonna hold off on that just in case. But we can do something with Tabak's character because I want an assumption Tabak doesn't show up in Tiberium Wars. If he does, then I'm just kind of fucked. Uh, I would simply rewrite his character to keep the whole thread of him becoming dissatisfied, like him becoming disenfranchised with Nod as, or more specifically, just Nod as like a war faction. Like you can easily have Tabak be like more of him saying that we shouldn't fight anymore, but like we should still fight. But I simply don't want to fight. I want to do like humanitarian stuff like that. And you can kind of center it on that, him just becoming more and more disenfranchised with the war as a whole, to kind of feed into like him quitting, like him discharging from the force with Joyce. And you can even have like Joyce, she becomes friends with like Fong and Damien. That's that way when Fong loses his arm and Joy sees like how broken Damien is, like you can easily she starts to really care about him at this point because they do love each other. He's like she sees like someone she actually cares about losing, and it's like I'm gonna leave too. Like she becomes quickly disenfranchised, but also wanting to be there for her boyfriend and stuff like that. And you can also have their character dynamic be like that, like Tabak kind of expressing his frustration about the war effort to Joyce, and Joyce slowly like looking around throughout the story as she's seen like all the death and destruction, and realizing and questioning herself, like, is it really worth to keep the war effort? And kind of and they leave less as like not believing in Nod. Like they still think Nod, is not the biggest shit ever. Kane the Messiah, but more like they wanted to devote themselves more to like helping the people, like just helping the small people, like doing like charity work and stuff like that. And I think that would have been a nice direction for Tabak as a character. But yeah, that's really all I would want to change. Uh, I will see you in part 3 of Project Genesis. This has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.